Juan Vitali, so great to have you at the office. Finally, it's been so long since we started chatting.
Yes, I'm delighted to be here. I haven't seen you in a while, but yes, things are moving.
Yeah, so I mean, your role is pretty amazing. So you're with the Army. I mean, you're one of like the great minds in terms of thinking towards the future. And the other thing that I just found so special when I first met you is that you're like a hardcore nuclear engineer too.
I
You're
am,
original.
I am, I am. I graduated in 1992, University of Florida, with a nuclear engineering degree, and it's been a long road, and here I am.
Okay, let's take it back to the beginning. How did you first even get interested in nuclear to begin with? How did you choose that to be
Oh boy,
your field of practice?
that's quite a story. So I was born in Venezuela of Italian parents, and when I went through high school, at the time we used to have, we had the 3 Mile Island accident.
Mm.
It was 1978, I believe, 78, 79. And I was intrigued by it all. And I said to myself, why I want to study this? And I was quite the ace in chemistry and physics and so forth. And I said, I want to study this. Lo and behold, there was an opportunity through a scholarship to come to the United States. And I ended up at the University of Florida.
Amazing.
I studied, so Florida was one of the top 5 schools in the country. And so Florida being close to home, it was like ideal because I could come back home to see my parents and relatives, whatnot, in Venezuela for Christmas time. And the idea was to become a nuclear engineer. Venezuela was on this kick back then, a long time ago, to build nuclear reactors to replace fuel exports, a fuel that would be used for electricity, to replace that with nuclear power, so that they could harvest the price and the cost of exporting oil. So that was a big national drive back then. Big designs. About 100 and some Venezuelans went out to become nuclear engineers,
Yeah.
and well, you know the story today.
Well, I think what's pretty amazing is that you were part of that journey, that early journey to like bring a new technology across the world.
Right.
I mean, you must have been like the pride and joy of, of your whole country. I mean, that's pretty
Well,
incredible.
it was interesting. Yeah, so everybody placed a lot of bets on this in Venezuela, because of the wealth of the country at the time, and the drive of the leadership, and political and otherwise, that this would be a big deal. And then things fell apart. So,
Yeah.
but there was some notion of a grand strategy that Venezuela would become this nuclear power, and this very ambitious plan for the country to become quite the center of of Latin America as a powerhouse for technology.
There was a while that's what nuclear represented. Nuclear represented the epitome of an advanced technological civilization.
Right.
I mean, it's not just Venezuela, it's around the world. I mean, scientists from Korea were sent here,
Right.
and it really did launch their country into the future, really.
Right.
But it seems like there was a certain era where that was the mentality around the world. If you want to be an advanced country, if you want to be an advanced civilization, nuclear is going to be at the backbone of that. And we kind of, I guess, lost that feeling. But it's still kind of true.
Yeah.
Like that is what nuclear can do.
It is. It is. And so with everything else that's going on, and the threat of global warming, and how we can harness nuclear power, nuclear energy to be that alternative that can indeed change the way of the direction in which we're going with global warming.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and I'm happy to see that there's renewed interest worldwide
Yeah.
on the topic, because of nuclear truly is a green technology. So
When you went to Florida, what exactly did you specialize in?
I was just nuclear engineering at the beginning, just power plant engineering, and then I got a master's in radiation technologies, and then the PhD was in plasma physics, and it was related to the Mars mission. So I had a project on using uranium arcs as a way to provide power from what they used to be called magnetoplasma dynamic thrusters at the time for the.
Is that still on the table somehow?
That has come and gone. That was part of the SDI program, Strategic Defense Initiative program back then. of which there was also obviously a NASA component.
Yeah.
And also the Mars mission, of course, so that was part of it. But that was a NASA project I worked on, and then things kind of fizzled out.
And as it does with space, it goes in and out. So where did you transition after that?
So from there, because of my work on plasma physics and spectroscopy, I went and started looking at molecular spectroscopy, and that took me to doing flames and combustion and interactions of flame suppressants with fires, and got into ozone depleting substances replacements. And I went to work for the Air Force Research Laboratory at Tyndall Air Force Base.
Okay.
And I was the fire chief, fire research branch chief there for a few years. And from there, we found a solution for the halon problem, which was a very strong ozone depleter. The Air Force F-16 tank uses halon 1301 as a explosion suppressant, but when it's dumped into the atmosphere, it causes ozone depletion.
And enough of it was suppressed at a rate that would actually make a difference in terms of...
Yeah, so the F-16 today has what's called a fuel tank inertant, and it's used as a cover gas to put on top of the fuel. So if it ever gets a live fire round, it doesn't explode. It just goes through, causes damage, but it does not blow up to pieces. But the problem is, it's a lot. You have to put a lot of gas into that fuel tank, and so it's pounds and pounds and pounds. And so the part of the whole Montreal Protocol back then was to replace both freon and refrigerants that were chlorofluorocarbons, but also brominated fluorocarbons like halon, which is a fire extinguishant and an explosion suppressant. So we did this very large project. And we found a replacement, and the Air Force decided not to use it. But all the same, we got the EPA being very interested. It became one of the chemicals that EPA listed under the NFPA 2000 rule that calls for the replacement of halons. But anyway, so bottom line on that was the Air Force continues to use halon, but there are alternatives out there. But from there, then I was tapped by OSD to do...
OSD, what's OSD?
Office of Secretary of Defense.
Okay.
When I worked at Tyndall, then from there I moved over to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to work on the F-16 problem. And then from there, I got picked to go to the Pentagon at the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Director of Operational Testing Evaluation, live fire testing.
Live fire testing?
Yeah, because of the work that I did with the F-16 on live fire and finding ozone depleted substance replacement. And then there was basically all oversight of weapon systems on how do the fire extinguishing systems work and so forth and so on. And then I stayed there for about 3 years, and then I became faculty at Georgia Tech after that, Georgia Tech Research Institute.
When you're part of all these research laboratories at the Army or in the military, and they're doing all these tests for whether it be, if something's might explode or if it's weapons related, are you actually like going out into the middle of the desert somewhere and blowing stuff up? And
Yes,
seeing
that's
how
right. That's how it is. In fact, Channel Lake is one of the desert places. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base has a testing facility as well. Aberdeen has a proving ground where you actually test. Live fire test tanks and things like that. The Navy has a test down in Alabama, Mobile. So.
And sorry, this is just my personal curiosity now.
Yeah.
Is there somewhere some video library that has just high definition footage of all these various tests?
Oh yeah, lots of those. Yeah, sure.
Can the public get access to this, or is it all sealed
I
up?
don't know about the public, but yeah.
I would love to just be able to watch things blow
sure.
up.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly So, yeah, definitely there are videotapes. Video feed of all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
It sounds like a very cool job for an engineer to have.
Yeah,
just
so
kind of
I had
watch
a lot
stuff
of
blow
fun.
up and then figure out how to make it
things.
not blow up as much.
Right. They used to call me Boom Boom Vitali back then.
What did they call you? Tell me that again.
Boom Boom Vitali.
I love that. Boom Boom Vitali. But that's amazing. That really kind of foreshadows the rest of your career in terms of looking forward to, hey, like I've got to think about technology different than everybody else because I've got to anticipate what's going to happen in the future.
Right. So, and this is so my drive, like just like the halon problem, we went to find it and find a solution. We were very sharply focused on that, and we found a solution. Being the environment being a big deal for me personally, believing in trying to do the best we can with what God gave us. So we're trying to be good stewards of that. That became kind of like the underlying motivation for why we did what we did, and finding a solution was very satisfying at that point. So fast forward to from Georgia Tech, then I became government employee, and I was a test and evaluation guy for aviation systems at the Army, and then that's when my Army career began. And then from there, I was very much focused on testing and technology and so forth, and then I ended up at the Logistics Innovation Agency. And
Logistics Innovation Agency.
Right.
They had a whole innovation agency for logistics. Why is that? What's so important about logistics when it comes to that?
Well, so without logistics, you can't win wars.
Right.
You can't.
And that's literally moving goods and people around.
Moving
the planet.
goods, people, doing the maintenance, doing the supply, providing the right supply of fuel at the right moment for the right mission.
And we've known this since like World War I, World War II, when we were like blowing up train tracks because that's how they would move goods to across
That's right.
the
So
continent.
transportation, distribution, supply, maintenance, those are the functions of logistics.
And what are the main things that are moved around? Is it fuel? Is it
It's fuel,
is
it's
it
water,
weapons? Is it
fuel, water, food, ordnance.
Ordnances are bombs.
Munitions.
Or,
Yeah.
okay.
Right, munitions.
Yeah.
Right. So those are the functions. So the logistician helps the what we call the maneuver guy that's sitting out there fighting.
Yeah.
The logisticians are the sustainers. So they basically provide the support and enable the warfighter to become lethal and win the fight for the nation.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very important to be able to have a footprint that supports, but then so you want that footprint to be large enough to supply what the warfighter needs, but also not too big that you become a burden to the fight. Right. So and that became very obvious in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, where 50% of our casualties were due to not because we're fighting the bad guys necessarily with being attacked by the enemies at the edge of the fight, but because we're transporting fuel and water.
50%.
50% of the casualties were due to transport of fuel and water.
That's crazy.
That's 18,000 casualties, right?
That's insane.
Right.
So, I mean, your job in terms of figuring out how to minimize the logistical burden of the transportation, and literally could have been the biggest lever in terms of saving lives in the military.
That's right. So, and to that end, I think, so fast forward to the topic of nuclear, back 2003, when we started the Iran-Iraq war, we racked up all those casualties. In 2013, Congress, alarmed by all these casualties, saw an opportunity, given the progress that modular reactors have made in terms of technology, to ask the question, could we envision a mobile reactor in the battlefield?
A mobile reactor in a battlefield.
Right.
And this is to get
get to the question, to answer the question, can we save lives? Can we reduce the casualties in the battlefield because of the transport of fuel and water?
And I understand how it would transport fuel, or you need less fuel to transport, because this mobile reactor essentially would be, I guess, like a power spot out there.
So the fuel is used primarily for aviation, but also for installation power, right? So there's a lot of fuel being moved to the forward locations to provide power to installation. So forward operating bases or even remote bases.
Yeah.
And so the idea was, because we have, 60 million gallons of fuel transported, or 84 million, I think is the last count, in particular Iraq situation. can we do better? Can we reduce that so we can reduce our exposure of our logisticians to live fire?
Okay,
Because
so
of
now you need
transmission.
to move less fuel because you've got a power source out there. What about actually synthesizing fuel at location? Was that ever a possibility?
Well, with nuclear it is.
Yeah.
Until then, it's not. I think the preferred way to do this is obviously just grab it from the U.S. and then bring it to the battlefield.
Yeah.
And if you can make fuel at the point of sight through some sort of a process by which you capture CO2 and make JP8 or diesel.
JP8. That's like jet plane fuel or something? Or?
It's JP8 is a type of fuel that's used in aviation, vehicles, and ground vehicles even.
Yeah.
It's like diesel.
And does the Army or does the military at large have the technology that if you had an abundant enough power source, do all of the processes exist to capture CO2 from the air and then reconstitute your hydrocarbons?
So it's called a Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, and that's at least a 50-year-old patent.
Yeah.
So that's a well-known patent how to do that.
Yes.
To capture CO2 from air or capture CO2 from seawater, which, by the way, the Navy is already mastered. Right,
for
so
making fuel on board of
a ship,
aircraft carrier or something,
or whatever. So whatever ship grabs the CO2 extracted from seawater and then synthesize jet fuel or JP8 or diesel, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They have a demonstration plant. I think they've been successful demonstrating that. But grabbing CO2 from air is quite a bit of there's orders of magnitude different than having it from the seawater.
And so, where my mind jumps straight to climate change, and we could solve the climate change problem by pulling CO2 straight from the seawater, which we already know how to do, because we're in a state of permanent mixture between CO2 in the air and CO2 in the seawater.
That's right. That's correct. We could. So you're doing...
And the military is on top, they are the ones pioneering this technology right now.
Right.
It's incredible how some of the same technology that's used to solve logistical challenge in the military. Now,
right.
Forget however you feel about, what the military is doing after the logistical issues. Put that aside for a second. They are first and foremost a giant logistical enterprise.
That's right.
And those same logistical challenges, the technology that comes from them, can be used to solve global problems.
That's right. So don't forget, the biggest reason why the U.S. military is as powerful as it is because of its ability to project power. And you can't project power without providing logistical support by means of fuel.
Yep.
The fact that we can deploy anywhere around the world with a very short amount of time is what allows us to be the world power that we are.
Yeah.
And so to maintain the status of being able to deploy and project power efficiently and quickly is what allows us to be where we are. And I think... And so to the extent that we're able to reduce that logistics footprint by providing a source of energy that, number one, reduces the amount of fuel that is used in the battlefield, but number two, also contributes to the global warming issue, becomes a green technology that supports the warfighter and saves lives.
And so the military, they already see you as this kind of future technology guy thinking about innovation and logistics. They know that you've got a nuclear background, and then they see this problem that they have moving fuel around. So you're the guy that they tap to think about this very issue.
Right.
So what happens? What's your process to start thinking about, hey, how do we bring mobile nuclear to the military?
So as a result of that inquiry from the Congress, the Defense Science Board was convened. So Secretary of Defense basically tagged the Defense Science Board, and a report was issued and basically laid out, what's the state of the art, what can we do, what are the opportunities and challenges, and just in very broad brushes, what are the issues that we need to be working. And the outcome of that report basically said there is technology. We are at very high levels of readiness for that technology. We should definitely look into it. And oh, by the way, the Army should be the lead.
Yeah.
As the Defense Science Board said that. Immediately following that, because of our office in the Army is part of the requirements for the definition process, that we call the Army Requirements Oversight Council, our leadership is involved in that. So we decided to study this further for the Army, knowing full well that the Army has been here before. The Army used to have a reactor program office.
Yeah, the Army reactors office. I've read a book about this. Yeah.
Right. So they used to have an office back in 1950s, after the big push from President Eisenhower for atoms for peace. The Army, the Air Force, and the Navy, all services, were looking for ways to use nuclear power. Yeah. The Navy, by far, was the most successful in transitioning that for their propulsion systems for their ships and submarines. The Air Force invested heavily on a nuclear airplane program, and that was successful up to a point. And then the Army was very invested in developing mobile reactors, meaning truck-mounted reactors to provide power in the battlefield, 500 kilowatts or less, but also for fixed installations so that we could provide power, resilient power to bases all over the world where we had them. So, understanding the history, now we can apply some of that history, marry that to the current technology set that we have because of the advances due to DOE, industry, and a number of factors that made the fuel safer, inherently accident resistant, and easy to manufacture. Then the confluence of all those factors plus the history that the Army brings to the table, we saw that an opportunity, and so we produced a report which is available on through Google if you want. Google is Mobile Reactor, the study of mobile nuclear power plants for ground operations, easily found on Google, and we laid out invariably that what are the challenges and opportunities, because it's not a free lunch, right? So there are challenges with all this. And by the way, I'm here to say I'm speaking for myself and not for the Army.
Sure, duly noted.
So the Army has not made a decision on this topic, and so therefore they're still evaluating, thinking about it. But our report basically laid out, again, opportunities and challenges, right? So opportunities being the favorable political environment, the technology readiness, the desire to rebuild the nuclear industry for the country, becoming more competitive in the world stage, strategically important for the United States. And then the ability to make our supply lines survivable, ability to protect our soldiers. These are all, opportunities. And then the challenges obviously are, given the fact that our fuel industry is not doing well, we haven't had a reactor built in a while, there is no significant demand signal for enriched uranium. The industry is in a very, I call it moribund, not doing well. Yeah. And so that's a challenge. To restart the nuclear fuel industry and the fuel manufacturing enrichment is going to take a while. So, not to say it's impossible, but it's certainly a challenge. And of course, then there's a whole set of regulatory issues. If you were to focus on just a stationary reactor, like you would have a commercial reactor, there is the NRC. And we know how to do that. We know the regulatory pieces, the legal pieces, all of that. What we don't know is what happens if we mount a reactor on a C-17 and we ship it across the ocean and we fly over countries. Then what? What are the issues there? Yeah. And that is made a lot of people jump. And meaning say, okay, well, we have a lot of issues here. We need to work through in terms of the legal and the international law issues relating to that.
I hope
as well as the IAEA framework of consequence management if something happens, all kinds of issues. So it's not an easy free launch solution, but in my opinion, and the opinion of people that I work with, the opportunities are a lot greater than the challenges.
Of course. And we have to remember the opportunity is to save lives.
The opportunity is to save lives, that's right.
And inaction, this is the one thing that I often push back against the nuclear industry on. They're so afraid of the potential that, if something went wrong, we might hurt, one person here or there. One person might get, in the next Fukushima might get hurt or something. Right. We might cause some problem. But inaction, I think we're responsible for the 6 million air pollution deaths a year from coal. If we would give the world a cheaper energy source, right. If we would get out of our own way, if we would stop being so afraid that we might hurt one person, then we could save millions of lives. And what I like about the military taking some leadership on this, by the way, is because they've got to make hard choices every single day.
That's right.
When they put people, out on the battle lines, they can't be so wishy-washy about life and death decisions. They have to think, yes, we know someone might die, we know someone might get hurt, but we are going to treat this like pragmatic adults because we know we're saving more lives at the end of the day.
Well, so another thought along that thought is we do a lot of risky things in the military. We take risks on just about everything we do. We break things, we kill bad people.
Yeah.
And we do it with utmost care for our soldiers, airmen, sailors, and Marines. And we take hydrazine to the battlefield, and we take all these different chemicals to the battlefield, which are extremely risky, but we protect the soldiers, and we do it. We know how to do safety, and we know how to do it well.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, right? So, in terms of coal versus nuclear, I mean, nuclear is by far the safest form of energy, as we know. Operationally, the casualties due to nuclear are orders of magnitude less than any other form of energy, and that's proven by just looking at the data.
Yeah.
And so taking that to heart and understanding the potential of having a source of energy that is 1,000,000 times more dense than a chemical combustion, internal combustion engine, chemical combustion source of energy, which allows you to get rid of entire supply chains of fuel. It's a leap ahead capability.
It's amazing. It's amazing, yeah. When you think about it, that 1,000,000 times energy density, the fact that you have to move around 1,000,000 times less mass of stuff, forget even on the backside of potential waste streams or accidents or anything like that. Even on the front side of just transportation. So we were talking about transportation and the dangers in transportation in the military context, but even just people driving fuel around on the roads today. I mean, that's a hazard too. I mean, how many millions of billions of gallons of gasoline are we transporting around the country? And I'm sure drivers are dying doing that job too. Right. We can reduce whatever accident rate that is 1,000,000-fold because you're moving around 1,000,000 times less stuff for the same amount of energy.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, and the other piece to this to think about is, and I've been foot stomping this for a while too, which is moving towards the electrification, what I call the electrification of the force.
Yeah.
Meaning, we have electric vehicles, we have Tesla, we have the electrification of European rail, the electrification of most European countries that are going to electric vehicles. We need to envision, in my opinion, in the Army and the DoD, how can we transition to a force that is electrified, meaning electric tanks, electric transport vehicles, electric aviation. We have electric helicopters already.
Do we?
Sikorsky, I think it's Sikorsky, tested electric helicopters.
That's awesome.
Right, so moving in that direction is where you're moving away from the internal combustion engine. No longer is a fantasy. It's a reality. It's happening. And I think we're moving quickly worldwide. These are international trends, worldwide trends. I mean, look at China, right? How they're electrifying just about the entire rail system, and how they're moving quickly to electric vehicles. Europe again. So the Army, I think, would benefit a lot by doing that. So then tie that to the thought that you need a source of power to provide electricity to all these different capabilities, transportation. And needless to say, as we move forward into the future, we're looking at directed energy weapons, right? So we're looking at...
What's a directed energy weapon?
Laser, for example.
Whoa.
Laser, rail guns. We talk about additive manufacturing. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, like 3D printing, right?
With 3D printing, except in large scale with using lasers.
And I bet you could circumvent some of the supply chain challenges in the military as well by doing additive manufacturing, maybe on site somewhere.
That's right. That's another concept that we're working on. The Army's working on.
So cool.
Right. So all these things that we envision the future battlefield to be require strong supply of energy.
Yeah.
And the best estimates that we have are that if we continue on the path of using liquid hydrocarbon fuel to sustain that type of a fight, to meet our adversaries and their capabilities, we're not going to be able to do it.
Right. It's almost like we're going to be, it's like, if you study, which I'm sure you do, and I just kind of listen to radio shows every now and then on this topic, but if you study kind of like the history of war, when two enemies confront each other, and one has like the next generation of technology, and the other is the last generation of technology.
Right.
The one with the next generation technology, it's like not even a joke. They just like wipe the other one off the map.
Right.
Like it's crazy. Just even having like whatever the new metal of the time, steel versus whatever it was, or having what was it? I think I remember reading about this with respect to like the 7-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, where it's like there were like hundreds of tanks approaching Israel, and they had so fewer military assets, but because they had the next generation tank that had like night vision and everything,
that's right.
They just totally wiped everyone out without any casualties.
Right.
They took out like 7 opposing armies. It was crazy.
Right. Exactly. So maintaining that edge, technological edge, is critical for our survival. If we're ever going to be in a situation where we have to face our adversaries, we need to be ready for that. And to be ready means you need to be on the technological edge.
Yeah.
And a small modular mobile reactor enables that.
And so as you're thinking about what this new small modular mobile reactor needs to look like, have you guys set forth design criteria? And,
yes.
And what happens? Then private companies submit bids to say, hey, we want to be the provider of this technology for you. What's the mechanism by which we bring this vision to reality?
Right, so we're already well down the path. So the Office of Secretary of Defense Strategic Capabilities Office, which is aside from the services, so Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and then there is OSD, right? Okay. So they're separate organization. They have embarked on a prototype development program by which they're actually going to build a small, we call them microreactors, less than 10 megawatts. And they've dedicated funds to that, and they submitted an RFI, request for information, and they put out an RFS, request for solution, and they're in the process right now of selecting.
That's amazing. When
the source selection board is convening, and there will be a decision sometime soon.
And does this get me public when there's a selection made? Do we get to see the winning design?
So I think the way they have it set up right now is they're going to choose 2, maybe 3 designs and do a preliminary design review. That's a process that will take a year, maybe 2, maybe a year. And then at that point, out of the 3 designs, they will pick the one, and then they will bend metal starting, I think, is next year, if I got that right.
Amazing.
And so the idea is then to produce a working prototype by 2024.
So cool.
Right, and then and not just a prototype that you can look at, put in a museum piece, but a prototype that actually you turn it on. The idea is to do an actual operational test, a small, not full operational, what we call it in the operational testing sense, but to develop it, test it, and then turn it on, drive it to an Air Force base, load it on a C-17, send it to Alaska or wherever, turn it back on, provide power to wherever you need for how many months, turn it back off, bring it back on a C-17, bring it back home.
Awesome.
Basically, more like a nuclear battery.
Awesome.
Think of it as a nuclear battery, a 10 megawatt nuclear battery.
Oh my God, I've got so many questions.
It's exciting.
This is amazing. This is the future because you can imagine the military invests in this technology, they prove that it works, and then all of a sudden the rest of society gets to benefit from all the advances that were created in terms of these powering cities across the country.
Right.
Or across the world. I mean, we could bring power to the world in this way. The same way that we
Right.
load one of these things up on a C-17 and drive it to a fly it to a military base, we could fly it to a city that needs power.
That's right. Right. So then, let me make sure we talk about the obvious questions, right? So what happens if you put this reactor in the battlefield, or not nearly close to the fight, but even remotely away from the fight? And what happens if it gets hit?
Yeah.
And then you have all this.
Could they dig a hole? Could they put it underground first and then?
So that's the concept, is to
Okay.
put it on underground, to have a berm-like concept where you have the ground be the shield. But even if it's a shield and you get hit by a round somehow, what
Yeah.
happens then, right?
what
So
happens?
the whole reason why this is becoming what is becoming today, the advancements to the point where we believe that it's a safe and reliable way of doing power, is because of the fuel.
Yeah.
Fuel, the tristructural fuel that is able to, this encapsulated fuel, as you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with trisul?
Yeah. So, and just so our audience fully understands, and maybe actually you could just explain it. The idea is that the fission products can't escape.
That's right. So they're tiny little particles, half a millimeter in diameter, and basically have a uranium kernel. And as the uranium fissions, fission products are emitted. A lot of those are volatiles. And the whole idea, not the whole idea, I should say, but Fukushima, Chernobyl, were large accidents because of the potential for release for volatiles. What TRISO does for us and for this technology is that if you do indeed get a live fire hit, which is possible in the battlefield, that we envision the remediation zone to be of certain size. We don't know what that could be, maybe 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet, depending on the power of the reactor, the size of the reactor, and so forth. But there will be no volatiles. So there will be no clouds over Kiev. There will be no clouds over Europe. There will be no massive cleanup that requires attention for where the plume is going, because there are no volatiles. And so that becomes key to answer the question: what happens if you have a live fire round? Because the fuel, the way that we're marrying the civilian developed fuel to a military application, is where now we can make the difference for the soldier.
And does it have to be TRISO, or is the requirements of the military just anything that prevents the spread of radionuclide contamination?
So
you can bring us TRISO, you can bring it, if you got something else, bring us something else.
Because TRISO has been tested and is at a very high level of technology readiness,
Yes.
so the prototype process at the moment is because we want to get to the fight. I don't want to say a fight, but we want to get to deploying a reactor quickly.
Yeah.
We want to rely on things that we know have been tested thoroughly.
Yeah.
And because TRISO is that technology that has been thoroughly tested, the SCO office, the OSD, Secretary of Defense office, has decided to call out TRISO as the fuel of choice.
As mandatory.
Yeah.
And talking about getting to deployment quickly, you threw out the date of 2024. What if it could be done faster? I mean, the way that I see things, like, especially when they're real pressing military efforts, we can move mountains. What would you say are kind of the main roadblocks that wouldn't make it 2022 if we wanted to? Is it just kind of how you allocate money and company formation and all these little things?
No,
or?
so, going from concept to prototype, it takes time, right? And so for a reactor is even more of an issue, right? Because you have to deal with all the safety issues relating to, operating a reactor, testing it, putting it in the right place. And so for that end, Idaho National Labs is a big part of DOE Labs complex. It's important to be able to tap onto that resource set to provide. But it's not easy. So I think, in fact, the earliest estimate that we had from DOE back a couple of years ago was that they would, the closest small modular reactor that they, and this is now 50 to 300 megawatt kind of reactor, would be 10 to 15 years. That's what their estimate was at that time. The fact that we're saying that we can deliver by 2023 is quite remarkable.
Yeah, I gotta recalibrate myself to nuclear timelines. See, I'm from the Silicon Valley world, where if it's like, if you don't deliver product in 18 months, like, close your company and get out of here.
Well, this is a little more complex than that. This is a very complex technology that requires, a lot of controls and a lot of. So, if it's the issue of bending metal, we can bend metal tomorrow and execute something quickly. But because of the regulatory piece, and because of the siting pieces, environmental assessments, and all the issues relating to finding the site and doing all the things that need to be done in preparation for operating a reactor, it will take time. So there's a lot that goes into bending metal, but there is a lot of, I call it paperwork. And well, I mean,
the other side's logistics.
The other side's logistics, but I mean, it's justified. You need to understand the safety piece of this. You need to understand all the regulatory pieces, all that.
And so, who does this? Who does the regulatory and the safety when it comes to a military deployed reactor? Are they going to stand up their own Army office reactors again, or the equivalent?
So the Army does have an Army reactor office, and so they are going to be players on whether or how this reactor is going to be in place in the Army.
Yeah.
The OSD effort, because it's going to be built at Idaho National Labs, they have an exemption because of the DOE facility at the moment, but NRC, I believe, is involved.
But are they going to take the lead, or are they just going to be there to just kind of double check things over?
So I don't want to speak for SCO. So I mean, my understanding of it is at the moment is that there's a team of NRC folks that will be overseeing, although not necessarily providing authority or official blessing on anything, other than to the fact that it's good to have the NRC on board. I think that's the philosophy. Again, I'm not speaking for SCO, but the team at SCO can answer those questions. Suffice to say that they're well coordinated. I think it's moving fast, and I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's going to bring forth a new technology that can have so many advantages, even beyond the military applications. And when the military applications are, there to save lives, and you can very easily connect the dots, who couldn't love it?
So let me tell you a little bit about that. It's one of the reasons why this has become very serious for me. Is because over my years within the Army, I've witnessed the devastation that war has wrought on soldiers.
Yeah.
Folks have dear friends of mine who are logisticians, transportation logisticians, who have survived IEDs, so I've survived IED attacks. And so to me, it's personal because I have dear friends who are survivors, not just physical survival, but also mental and psychological. So the PTSD, the devastation that the war has wrought on close people, folks that are dear to me, has been a vector for me to act on this. Very deeply felt that this is something that we need to, if we have the opportunity to do, we should do. And this is what's driving me.
Juan Vitali, thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you.